She worked quietly in the small cafe, moving between tables with a soft smile that most people barely noticed. Every day was the same: pouring coffee, refilling water, carrying plates of food, and saying polite words to customers who often barely glanced her way. She never thought of herself as special. In fact, she often felt invisible, like a shadow that floated across the room, doing her job without drawing attention. Her life was simple, and she liked it that way. There were no grand dreams, no expectations of fame, only the small comforts of routine. Despite the quietness of her life, there were moments when she felt something stir inside her. She would hum softly while cleaning the tables, letting the tunes flow naturally, without thinking. The melodies were delicate and careful, as if she were speaking through music in a language no one else could hear. Sometimes she would tap rhythms on the trays she carried, her fingers dancing to imaginary songs, a secret performance that belonged only to her. These small gestures were fleeting, but they made her heart beat faster, giving her a sense of life beyond the ordinary. Every evening, after the cafe closed, she would sit on the small stool behind the counter, closing her eyes for a moment and imagining a different world. She dreamed of music that could move people, that could make them stop and listen, even for just a minute. But these dreams stayed private, tucked away like delicate notes in a hidden diary. She never spoke about them because she feared others would laugh or dismiss her. It seemed safer to keep her talent locked inside, only letting it breathe in secret. The cafe itself was modest but cozy. The walls were lined with shelves holding old books and tiny plants that brightened the room. The smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries lingered in the air, creating a warm comfort for regular customers who came for their morning routines. She knew most of the regulars by face and a few by name, but she was never truly part of their world. She was the friendly face who served them, nothing more. Still, she took pride in her work. She made sure the tables were spotless, the drinks were just right, and every plate of food looked inviting. In her own quiet way, she cared about the small details that made the cafe feel alive. While she worked, she noticed little things that others didn't. The way a customer's hand trembled as they sipped their coffee, the gentle sway of a plant in the window when the wind blew, the soft creak of the old wooden floors under her shoes. These little observations felt important to her, as if they were pieces of a bigger story she could almost touch but never fully reach. They were small moments of beauty in a life that often felt ordinary. She also loved the piano in the corner of the cafe. It wasn't used often, mostly sitting there as a decoration, but sometimes she would glance at it while clearing tables. The piano seemed to call to her in a way nothing else did. Its polished wood reflected the warm lights above, and she imagined the music it could make, rich and alive. Many times she would place her hands over the keys, pressing lightly to feel the texture, but she never played a full song. It was as if the piano understood her hesitation, waiting patiently for the day she would truly play. Her coworkers often talked about their lives outside the cafe, weekend trips, parties, big dreams, but she stayed quiet. She didn't share much about herself, not because she didn't have stories, but because she didn't think anyone would care. In her mind, she was just a waitress, a person who served coffee and smiled politely. That was all she was, or so she believed. Despite the quiet and the routine, she found small ways to keep her spirit alive. Sometimes she would close the cafe door for a moment, sit on a stool, and hum a melody she remembered from a childhood lesson she once took. The notes were simple, but they brought her a joy she couldn't describe. It was in those moments when no one was watching that she felt a spark of something bigger inside her. She felt alive, like she could be more than just a shadow moving between tables. Her life was not without struggles. Money was tight, and she often worried about bills and rent. The work was exhausting, and some days it felt like the cafe was a never-ending loop of carrying plates and pouring coffee. Customers could be rude or impatient, and sometimes she would go home with sore arms and tired feet. Yet, despite all this, she never complained. She understood the value of hard work, and she found a quiet satisfaction in doing her job well. It was her anchor, the one thing she could rely on in a world that often felt uncertain. She had a few friends outside of work, but even in those relationships, she often felt like she didn't quite fit in. People liked her kindness and her gentle nature, but few knew about the music that lived inside her. She wondered sometimes if they would understand if they did. Would they think she was strange? Would they laugh? These questions kept her silent, keeping her talent wrapped up like a secret treasure she wasn't ready to show the world. Every day, she watched the world go by through the cafe windows. She saw people rushing to work, children skipping to school, couples holding hands, and the occasional musician carrying an instrument case. Each person seemed to have a story, a purpose, a life that was visible to everyone else. She felt invisible in comparison, but she didn't mind too much. She had her own invisible stories, her own music, her own small universe that no one else could see. And yet, deep down, she hoped for something more. Not fame or fortune, but a moment when her music could speak for her. A moment when people would listen and feel something because of her. She didn't know when that moment would come, but she held onto the hope like a candle flickering in the dark. It was fragile, but it was real. It kept her going through long shifts, through tired feet and aching arms, through the quiet monotony of her life. She was content with her routine, but she also felt ready for something to change, even if she didn't know what. The piano in the corner seemed to promise that change, a silent companion waiting for the day she would finally reach out and touch its keys fully. Until then, she existed in her quiet world, moving between tables, smiling at customers, humming soft melodies that no one else heard. She was just a waitress, and yet, she carried a hidden spark inside her, a spark that was ready one day to shine brighter than she ever imagined. One morning, the cafe was brighter than usual. The sunlight spilled through the windows, lighting up the tables and making the floorboards shine. The small bell above the door jingled, and a group of people came in, dressed in clothes that looked expensive and carefully chosen. They were not the usual cafe crowd, and their presence made the atmosphere feel different. The waitress noticed them immediately, and a small sense of curiosity stirred in her. She moved between tables, taking orders with her usual quiet efficiency, but she felt a strange tension in the air. Among the visitors was a man who seemed to command attention without saying much. He had an air of confidence, the kind that made people notice him even before he spoke. He looked around the cafe with interest, glancing at the walls, the shelves, and finally, at the piano in the corner. The waitress noticed his gaze, and for a brief moment, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. The piano had always called to her, but she never imagined anyone else would pay attention to it in the same way. The man spoke to the cafe owner in low tones, and she could only catch pieces of the conversation. From what she understood, they were planning a small event, something casual but with music. The man's eyes kept returning to the piano, and the waitress felt a mix of fear and excitement. Part of her wanted to run to the piano and play, to show the music she had held inside for so long. But another part of her clung to caution, telling her to stay quiet, to remain invisible as always. As the day went on, the visitors placed their orders and began talking quietly among themselves. The cafe was busier than usual, and the waitress moved quickly, balancing plates and cups with practiced grace. Every now and then, her gaze drifted to the piano, and she felt a pull she could not explain. She imagined herself sitting at the keys, letting her fingers dance across them, filling the room with music that would make everyone stop and listen. The thought made her heart race, but she forced herself to focus on her work, telling herself it was impossible. People like them, people with polished appearances and confident manners, would never care about a waitress's music. Then, unexpectedly, the man stood up and spoke. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone pay attention. He asked if anyone in the cafe could play the piano. The room went quiet. Some of the visitors smiled politely, glancing at each other as if expecting a performer to appear. The waitress froze in her tracks, her hands gripping a tray as if it could anchor her to reality. Her heart pounded in her chest. Could he mean her? Could he be asking her to play? The cafe owner laughed nervously and said, almost jokingly, that there was a waitress who sometimes touched the piano. She glanced at the waitress, who felt her face grow hot. She shook her head slightly, trying to signal that she was not interested, that she could not do such a thing. But the man's eyes were fixed on her, and he smiled gently, encouraging her to come forward. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, and she felt a a pull she could not resist. This was her chance, a moment she had imagined countless times, yet now that it was here, it was terrifying. Her co-workers whispered behind her, some with excitement, some with worry. They had seen her hum melodies and tap rhythms on trays, but they had never heard her play a full song. No one knew the depth of her talent, not even the people who thought they knew her. She took a deep breath and nodded slightly, signaling that she would try. The footsteps that carried her to the piano felt heavy and light at the same time, as if her body was walking on a tightrope between fear and courage. When she reached the piano, she paused, her fingers hovering above the keys. The room was silent except for the faint hum of conversation from the visitors. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the secret moments she had spent practicing, the melodies that had lived in her mind for years, waiting for a time like this. She let her fingers touch the keys lightly at first, testing the sound, letting the vibrations travel up her arms and into her chest. The first notes were soft and hesitant, barely audible, but they carried a tenderness that caught the attention of those nearby. As she continued, the music began to flow more freely. Her confidence grew with each note, each chord forming naturally under her touch. She did not think about the visitors, the café, or the man who had asked her to play. She thought only of the music, letting it rise from inside her, filling the room with a beauty that no one had expected. The soft melodies turned into richer harmonies, and the hesitant notes became a flowing rhythm that made people stop and listen. Some of the visitors leaned forward, their eyes widening in surprise, as they realized that the simple waitress before them was creating something extraordinary. Memories of her childhood floated through her mind. The small keyboard she had saved up for, the quiet afternoons spent practicing while the world moved on without noticing. She remembered the lessons she had taken in secret, the hours spent perfecting scales, the joy of discovering that her hands could bring music to life. All of those moments converged in this single performance, giving her strength and courage she did not know she possessed. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller using the piano as her voice. The café seemed to transform around her. The smell of coffee and pastries faded into the background, replaced by the living presence of music. Customers stopped talking, and even the visitors who had come with expectations of casual entertainment found themselves captivated. They watched as her fingers moved with grace and precision, shaping the melodies with emotion and subtlety. Each chord, each pause, each flourish carried a piece of her soul, and the audience could feel it. It was not just skill, it was honesty, a pure expression of her inner world. As the piece continued, whispers of astonishment began to ripple through the room. People exchanged glances, unable to believe that someone so ordinary in appearance could produce such extraordinary music. The man who had asked her to play smiled quietly, his eyes reflecting genuine admiration. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The music itself was the conversation, the connection between her and everyone listening. It was a language more powerful than words, one that spoke of dreams, courage, and hidden potential. By the time she reached the final notes, the café was completely silent. Even the usual sounds, the clatter of cups, the hum of conversation, had disappeared, replaced by the lingering resonance of her music. Then, slowly, applause began. At first, it was hesitant, then it grew, filling the room with warmth and excitement. She lifted her hands from the keys, her heart still racing, and looked up to see the amazed faces around her. The visitors were smiling, some with tears in their eyes, others simply staring in wonder. Her co-workers were equally stunned, realizing that the quiet, modest waitress they knew had hidden a brilliance they had never imagined. The man who had encouraged her to play stepped forward and nodded, a look of genuine respect on his face. He praised her talent, speaking of the power and emotion she had shared in her performance. The words were kind, but she hardly heard them. She was still caught in the afterglow of the music, feeling a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. For the first time, she understood that the world could notice her, that her music could touch others, and that she had the power to step out of the shadows she had always occupied. After the visitors left, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The small piano in the corner was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of possibility, a reminder that her hidden talent could no longer be contained. Customers who had been there for the performance returned to their routines, but their conversations now included her. Their smiles acknowledged her presence, and some even asked when she would play again. For her, it was a moment of awakening, a turning point that would forever alter the course of her life. That day, she went home feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and joy. She replayed the experience in her mind, remembering each note, each glance, each small expression of astonishment she had seen on the faces around her. She realized that her life as a simple waitress had not been meaningless, but it had been incomplete. Now, she could see a new path, one where her music could live fully, where her talent could shine, and where she could share a piece of herself with the world. It was a beginning, and she felt ready, for the first time, to embrace it. The next day, the cafe was buzzing with an energy that felt different from usual. She arrived early, moving through the quiet streets with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. The memory of yesterday's performance lingered in her mind, the notes of her songs still playing softly in her head. She could not believe how people had reacted, how even the strangers had paused to listen. It felt like a dream, yet the excitement was real and almost overwhelming. As she entered the cafe, she noticed the small crowd of visitors waiting near the piano. They were smiling and talking quietly, some holding their phones as if they wanted to capture another moment. Her heart skipped a beat, but instead of fear, there was a thrill, a sense that something important was about to happen. She had been invited to play again, and this time, the room seemed to hum with expectation. She moved through the cafe, greeting customers with her gentle smile, but every step carried a weight of anticipation. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped down a table, and she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. The piano was waiting, its polished surface reflecting the morning light, and for a moment, she imagined it as a doorway to a world she had always wanted to explore. A world where her music could speak louder than words. Her co-workers gave her encouraging nods, their eyes bright with admiration and curiosity. They had seen her talent yesterday, but witnessing her face the piano again made them realize how much courage it took. They knew this was not just about music. It was about her stepping into a new space, breaking free from the invisible role she had always played. The room seemed to quiet as she approached the piano, the chatter fading into soft whispers. When she reached the piano, she paused, placing her hands gently on the keys. The smooth surface felt familiar and comforting, yet the nerves still fluttered in her stomach. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and allowed herself to remember all the hours she had spent practicing in secret. The melodies she had imagined alone in her room, the tiny triumphs and mistakes she had learned from, all came rushing back. It was as if every private moment had been preparing her for this exact time. She pressed the first key, soft and cautious. The note rang out clearly, and she felt a spark of confidence. Slowly, she let her fingers move across the keys, finding the rhythm and flow that had always lived inside her. The notes started softly, gentle and tender, like a whisper to the world. She listened to the sound, felt it resonate in her chest, and allowed it to grow naturally. Each chord carried emotion, each pause gave space for feeling, and the room seemed to lean in closer with every measure. People began to notice the beauty unfolding before them. A couple who had been chatting earlier fell silent, their eyes fixed on her fingers. The visitors watched with amazement, their polite smiles replaced by genuine astonishment. They had expected simple notes or casual playing, but what they heard was far beyond ordinary. The music was alive, full of emotion and subtlety, a reflection of the hidden world she carried inside her. She felt herself relax more as she played, letting go of fear and letting the music guide her. Her fingers danced over the keys with increasing confidence, shaping the melody with care and passion. She was no longer just performing. She was speaking through the piano, telling a story that words could never capture. She imagined each note touching the hearts of those listening, bringing them into her world, even if only for a few minutes. The café seemed to disappear around her. The smell of coffee, the hum of conversation, even the clatter of dishes faded into nothingness. All that existed was the piano, the music, and the connection she felt with the audience. She could sense their surprise, their admiration, and their emotions moving with the flow of her melody. The music carried her, and in turn, it carried them, creating a shared moment of wonder and beauty. As the piece developed, she added more complexity, weaving harmonies and subtle variations that showcased not just skill, but deep understanding. Every note was intentional, every pause deliberate. The audience could feel the layers of emotion, the quiet intensity, and the joy in her performance. Some leaned forward, eyes wide. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. It was a moment of pure connection, where her talent and their attention met in perfect harmony. She thought of all the times she had felt invisible, unnoticed, a shadow moving between tables. Now, those feelings seemed distant and irrelevant. Here, in front of the piano, she was seen, truly seen, for her talent and her courage. She realized that all the quiet hours of practice, all the moments of dreaming alone, had been leading to this. The recognition was not just about applause. It was about understanding that her hidden world of music mattered, that it could touch others in ways she had only imagined. As the final notes approached, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The crescendo built, carrying the emotions of the entire piece, and then gently settled into a quiet ending. She lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes, meeting the faces of those around her. The silence that followed was electric, a moment where everyone seemed to hold their breath, caught between disbelief and awe. Then slowly, the applause began. It started softly, almost hesitant, and then grew louder, filling the café with energy and excitement. She smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond pride. It was a deep joy that came from sharing a piece of herself and being acknowledged. People clapped, cheered, and some even stood, unable to contain their admiration. The visitors who had come with casual curiosity were now fully captivated, their expressions reflecting genuine astonishment and respect. Her coworkers were equally amazed. They had always known she was talented in small ways, but seeing her perform like this was something entirely new. They exchanged glances, whispering in awe, realizing that the quiet, humble woman they worked alongside had a brilliance that could not be ignored. The café, once a place of routine and ordinary work, had become a stage for something extraordinary. The man who had asked her to play yesterday stepped forward, his expression one of admiration and quiet pride. He praised her talent, speaking about the depth of emotion and skill she had shared. She listened politely, though her heart was still racing. The music had been the true statement, the words merely a reflection of what everyone had just experienced. For her, the validation was not in the praise but in the connection, in seeing the impact of her music on those who had only just begun to notice her. After the performance, she felt a sense of calm and completeness. The fear that had accompanied her steps to the piano had melted away, replaced by a feeling of belonging, of purpose. She realized that this was only the beginning, that her life could now include the music she had always carried inside her. The café was no longer just a place of work. It was a space where her talent could live, where her voice through the piano could be heard. That day, she continued her work with a lightness in her step. She still served coffee, wiped tables, and smiled at customers, but there was a difference now. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, a knowledge that she was more than a waitress, that she had a talent that could touch hearts. People noticed the change, sensing the quiet strength and joy radiating from her. Some asked when she would play again. Others simply smiled with understanding. She had stepped into a new chapter, one where her music could finally shine. As the day ended and the cafe grew quiet once more, she sat by the piano, her fingers brushing the keys gently. She thought of the audience, of the astonishment on their faces, and of the connection that music had created. She understood now that her life was not defined by routine or by the expectations of others. It was defined by her courage to step forward, by her willingness to share her hidden world, and by the joy that came from letting her music breathe freely. And in that quiet moment, she knew that this was only the start of a journey that could take her far beyond the walls of the small cafe, into a world that had always been waiting for her. By the following morning, the cafe had a different feeling. People who had witnessed her performance yesterday whispered excitedly among themselves, returning to see if she would play again. Even those who had not been there seemed to know something special had happened. The air was charged with expectation, a subtle tension that made her pulse quicken. She arrived early, carrying the calm composure she had learned to maintain, but inside, a storm of excitement and nerves swirled. The piano stood in the corner, polished and gleaming, almost calling her name. She approached it slowly, running her fingers over the keys, feeling the smooth surface, and imagining the sound that would come from them. Every note she had ever played in private rose to meet her, and she felt the quiet confidence that had begun to grow inside her. She remembered the looks on people's faces yesterday, the surprise, the awe, the quiet admiration, and it filled her with a warmth that made her heart swell. As she settled on the piano bench, she took a deep breath, letting her fingers hover above the keys. This time, she did not hesitate. She let the music flow naturally, not thinking about anyone else, only about the melodies that lived inside her. The first notes were gentle, inviting, and as they filled the cafe, she felt the energy of the room respond. People stopped mid-conversation, cups paused in midair, and even the regular sounds of the cafe faded into a reverent silence. She realized she had reached a point where her music commanded attention without her having to do anything other than let it breathe. Her hands moved with grace, each key a voice in the story she was telling. The melodies were no longer just simple tunes. They were layered with emotion, each chord conveying a depth she had never fully expressed before. She could feel the audience leaning in, captivated, and this realization gave her a new sense of freedom. She was not just performing, she was sharing a piece of herself that had always been hidden, and in doing so, she created a connection that transcended words. The piece grew more complex, and with each note, her confidence blossomed. Her fingers danced over the keys, moving quickly in some places and lingering in others, shaping the music with intention and feeling. She added subtle flourishes, delicate trills that sparkled like sunlight, and deep, resonant chords that carried the weight of emotion. She could feel the room reacting, the collective breath of the audience holding steady as they absorbed the beauty of the performance. Some customers were leaning forward, eyes wide, lost in the music. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, feeling it resonate deep in their hearts. Even the cafe owner, who had known her quietly for years, stood nearby, stunned by the transformation happening before their eyes. The man who had first encouraged her to play watched intently, a quiet smile playing on his lips, seeing the full potential of her talent unfold. She felt a deep gratitude for this moment, a recognition that the piano was no longer just an object in the corner, but a bridge to a world she had always imagined. As the piece continued, she let herself feel the music fully. Every note was infused with emotion, every pause a space for reflection, every crescendo a burst of passion. She thought of her past, of the quiet hours of practice, the moments of solitude where she imagined performing for someone who truly listened. Now, in front of a real audience, her dreams were taking form, and the reality was more powerful than anything she had imagined. The audience could sense the depth of her feeling. Whispers of awe moved through the room as they realized the music was not just skill, but a reflection of her inner life. Some eyes glistened with tears, others widened with wonder, and a few people were simply silent, overwhelmed by the beauty they were witnessing. She was no longer invisible, no longer just a waitress. She was a storyteller, a voice that spoke through the piano, reaching hearts in a way that words never could. She began to experiment slightly, letting the music carry her beyond familiar melodies into improvisation. The sounds were daring, yet fluid, combining technical skill with raw emotion. Each phrase seemed to grow naturally from the previous, as if the piano itself were speaking through her. The audience responded instinctively, leaning closer, holding their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. The café had transformed entirely. It was no longer just a place of routine. It was a space where music could live and breathe. The air shimmered with energy, the soft smell of coffee mingling with the presence of awe and admiration. She played with a joy that was infectious, and even the regular customers, who had seen her day after day, could not help but feel moved by the unfolding performance. She realized that this was more than music. It was a connection, a shared experience that brought everyone in the room together. As the piece reached its climax, the music became a powerful wave, flowing with intensity and beauty. Her fingers moved with precision and freedom, creating a tapestry of sound that filled every corner of the cafe. She could feel the emotion in her own heart, the culmination of years of secret practice and quiet longing. The notes carried her story, her hope, and her courage, and the audience received it fully, letting themselves be transported by the music. Finally, she reached the ending, a delicate resolution that settled softly, leaving a lingering resonance in the air. She lifted her hands from the keys and looked up, meeting the astonished faces around her. There was silence for a moment, a collective pause as everyone absorbed what they had just experienced. Then slowly the applause began. It started as a quiet murmur, building into a wave of appreciation and admiration that filled the room. People stood, clapped, and cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling with wonder. The man who had encouraged her stepped forward, his expression one of deep respect. He spoke softly, praising her talent, her courage, and the emotion she had poured into the performance. She listened, though her mind was still swimming in the joy and energy of the music she had just shared. It was not the praise that mattered most. It was the recognition that her music had reached people, that it had moved them, that it had changed the room entirely. Her co-workers gathered around her, their faces alight with excitement and admiration. They had always known her as a kind, quiet person, but now they saw her in a new light. They realized the depth of her talent, the power of her music, and the courage it took to step into this space. The café, which had always been a place of routine and ordinary work, had become a stage for something extraordinary, and she had become the heart of it. When the café quieted down, she remained by the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. She thought of the people who had watched her, of the reaction she had seen, and of the connection she had felt. It was a moment of reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that her life had changed in ways she could not have imagined. She realized that her talent was no longer a secret, and that the music she had carried inside her for so long could now breathe freely and reach others. That day, she walked home with a lightness she had never known. Her steps were confident, her heart full, and her mind alive with possibilities. She thought of the journey ahead, of the music she could create, of the people she could reach, and she felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a doorway to a world where she could fully be herself, where her music could shine, and where her hidden brilliance could finally be seen and felt by all. After that performance, the café seemed to buzz with a new life. People could not stop talking about the music they had heard. Some had recorded short clips on their phones, eager to show friends or post online. News of the waitress who played the piano so beautifully spread quickly, even among people who had never visited the café before. She moved through her usual tasks with a quiet grace, but she noticed the difference in the atmosphere. Customers looked at her differently now, some with curiosity, some with admiration, and a few with awe. She felt their attention, but instead of feeling nervous, she felt a gentle warmth that made her heart swell. Her coworkers whispered among themselves, excitedly exchanging thoughts about what had happened. They could hardly believe that the quiet woman they had worked with for years had this extraordinary talent. Some had seen her hum melodies or tap rhythms, but no one had imagined she could produce music that could touch hearts so deeply. Their excitement was contagious, and she could not help but smile quietly, feeling a mix of pride and modesty. She had always believed her music was private, a hidden world, but now it was reaching out and touching others. The man who had first encouraged her to play returned, this time bringing more friends. They spoke to the cafe owner and explained that they were involved in organizing music events. They wanted to know if the waitress would be willing to perform in front of larger audiences. She felt a surge of excitement, but also a touch of fear. The idea of playing for strangers outside the familiar cafe was intimidating, yet something inside her stirred. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, and now it seemed the moment had arrived. She thought about her past, the countless hours spent practicing alone, the melodies she had imagined in her quiet room, the secret notes she had written down and played repeatedly. All of those moments had been preparation for this opportunity, and she realized that her life was changing in ways she could not have foreseen. The shy, invisible waitress was no longer just a background figure. She had become a musician who could capture attention and move people with her art. As she considered the idea of performing elsewhere, the cafe continued to fill with customers eager to hear her play. She sat at the piano, her hands brushing over the keys lightly, feeling the familiar texture under her fingers. The first notes were soft, inviting, and as they filled the room, people paused to listen. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched intently, captivated by the skill and emotion in her performance. She could feel the connection, the silent communication between her and the audience, and it strengthened her confidence. The performance that day was different from the previous ones. She let herself experiment, adding subtle variations and personal touches to the melodies she had practiced. The music became more expressive, each note carrying emotion and intention. She could sense the audience responding instinctively, leaning in, holding their breath, feeling the energy of the room shift as the music flowed. It was no longer just a performance. It was an experience, a shared journey that brought everyone in the cafe together in a moment of wonder. People began to whisper among themselves, astonished by what they were hearing. Some had never seen anything like it before, while others were moved deeply by the beauty and emotion of the music. The atmosphere was electric, filled with a mixture of admiration, surprise, and quiet excitement. The audience seemed to understand that they were witnessing something rare, a talent that had remained hidden until now. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that her music had the power to touch others in profound ways. After the performance, the applause was thunderous. Customers stood, clapped, and cheered, their expressions reflecting genuine admiration. The man who had encouraged her to play yesterday smiled, clearly pleased with the impact of her music. He spoke softly, praising her skill and the emotion she conveyed, and she listened with a quiet humility, feeling gratitude for the recognition. It was not just about the praise. It was about understanding that her music could reach others and make a difference. Word spread quickly beyond the cafe. People shared videos online, and soon, she became a topic of conversation in the community. Invitations to perform at local events and small gatherings began to arrive. She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension, but the thought of sharing her music with more people was exhilarating. She had spent so long hiding her talent, and now the world was ready to hear it. The realization was both empowering and inspiring, and she knew that her life was on the verge of a significant change. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble and grounded. She continued to work at the cafe, serving customers with her usual kindness and grace, but her heart carried a new sense of purpose. Each day, she practiced and refined her skills, preparing for the opportunities that were beginning to open up. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge to a world where her talent could flourish, a key to experiences she had only dreamed of. Her coworkers and regular customers watched the transformation with admiration. They had always known her as a quiet, dedicated person, but now they saw her in a new light. Her talent was undeniable, and her courage to step forward inspired others to recognize their own hidden abilities. The cafe had become a place of discovery, not just for her, but for everyone who witnessed her music. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of possibility, and she felt fortunate to be at the center of it. As days passed, the invitations continued to arrive. Local music enthusiasts, small event organizers, and even a few teachers reached out, eager to hear her play and share her gift with larger audiences. Each request brought a mixture of excitement and nerves, but she approached them with a quiet determination. She realized that her life was no longer defined solely by routine and work. It was now shaped by her music, her talent, and the connections she could create through her performances. With each new opportunity, she gained confidence. She understood that her music was not just for her own enjoyment, but had the power to touch and inspire others. She began to see herself differently, no longer just a waitress in a small cafe, but a musician with a unique voice and the ability to share it with the world. The recognition she received was not simply about fame or attention. It was about validation, about knowing that the talent she had nurtured in private could resonate with others in profound ways. Her life had transformed, yet she remained true to her humble beginnings. She continued to work at the cafe, maintaining the relationships she had built with coworkers and regular customers. She found joy in the simple routines, even as her musical journey expanded beyond the walls of the small space. The balance between her everyday life and her growing talent created a sense of fulfillment and stability. She was learning to navigate this new chapter with grace, embracing opportunities while remaining connected to the foundation that had shaped her. Through it all, she discovered a deeper sense of self. The shy, quiet person who once moved unnoticed between tables had become someone who could inspire, captivate, and connect through music. The applause, the recognition, and the invitations were meaningful, but the true reward was the realization that she had stepped into her full potential. Each performance, each note played, strengthened her confidence and reminded her of the power of courage, persistence, and the willingness to share what had long been hidden. By the end of the week, the cafe had become a place where people came not only for coffee and food, but also to experience her music. She had established a routine of performing at certain times, creating anticipation and excitement among customers. The piano, once just a piece of furniture, had become a symbol of possibility and transformation. Through her performances, she had shown that talent can emerge from unexpected places, that courage can change lives, and that beauty can be found in ordinary settings. Her story was inspiring others, reminding them that hidden potential exists within everyone, waiting for the right moment to shine. Over the next few weeks, her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The cafe was still her workplace, but it had become a place of inspiration and excitement. People came not just to enjoy coffee and pastries, but to experience the music she shared so freely. She played at set times, and each performance drew a crowd, both regulars and new visitors. Word of her talent continued to spread, reaching people who wanted to hear the story of the quiet waitress who had surprised everyone with her extraordinary skill. She was invited to perform at small events, local gatherings, and community functions. Each invitation brought a mix of nerves and excitement, but she approached them with growing confidence. The fear that had once held her back was replaced by a sense of purpose. She realized that her music could reach far beyond the cafe, touching hearts and inspiring people she might never meet personally. The thought that her hidden talent could make a difference in someone else's day gave her a new kind of joy. Despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded and humble. She continued to perform at the cafe, never forgetting the place where her journey had truly begun. She spent her mornings serving customers, learning their stories, and sharing small smiles. Yet, when she sat at the piano, she transformed. Her hands moved gracefully over the keys, each note carrying emotion, each pause giving room for reflection. The music became her voice, expressing feelings she could never put into words. Her life was busy, but she managed to balance work, practice, and performances. She carved out quiet moments for herself, revisiting melodies she had created in private, experimenting with new compositions, and allowing her creativity to flourish. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a means to express her deepest thoughts and emotions. She found solace and excitement in the music, discovering new layers of skill and artistry that she had not known existed within her. People who came to hear her play were often moved to tears, surprised laughter, or quiet reflection. She could see their reactions and feel the connection that music created. Some came back repeatedly, wanting to hear her play again, while others would leave with a sense of inspiration that stayed with them long after they walked out of the café. Her music had the power to change ordinary moments into memorable experiences, and she took great care in each performance, knowing that even a small gesture could leave a lasting impact. The community began to embrace her as more than just a waitress. They saw her as an artist, a storyteller, and someone who had transformed a simple café into a place of wonder and connection. Invitations to perform at local concerts and charity events arrived, each one expanding her reach and giving her new opportunities to share her gift. She felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility, knowing that her music could inspire others and bring joy into their lives. With each performance, her confidence grew. She no longer doubted her ability to captivate an audience. The initial fear that had made her hesitate at the piano seemed distant, replaced by a calm determination and a deep love for her art. She began to experiment more boldly, adding her own variations, improvisations, and unique touches to the pieces she played. Her music became a living expression of her personality, her emotions, and her experiences, and the audience responded with enthusiasm and appreciation. Even as she gained recognition, she never lost sight of her humble beginnings. She remembered the long hours of practice, the secret melodies, and the quiet moments of dreaming alone. Those memories reminded her of the journey she had taken and the courage it had required to step forward. She understood that her talent was a gift, but it was her willingness to share it that truly made a difference. Each performance was a chance to give back, to connect, and to inspire. She also noticed the impact her story had on others. People began to talk about hidden talents, about the courage to pursue dreams, and the importance of taking chances. Her journey became an example, showing that ordinary lives could hold extraordinary potential. Friends, coworkers, and strangers alike were encouraged to explore their own abilities, to step beyond fear, and to embrace the possibilities that awaited them. Her story had become more than music. It was a source of motivation and hope. Despite the growing attention, she remained focused on the joy of creating music. She did not chase fame or recognition. She pursued the simple, profound pleasure of expressing herself and sharing that expression with others. Each time she sat at the piano, she felt a deep connection with the audience, a silent understanding that music could bridge gaps, bring people together, and evoke emotions that words could not. It was a power she had longed to share, and now she did so with grace and confidence. Her life had transformed completely, yet it still held the small, familiar comforts she had always cherished. She enjoyed the routine of the cafe, the smiles of regular customers, and the quiet moments when she could reflect and practice. The piano had become a bridge between her ordinary life and the extraordinary possibilities that lay beyond. It had opened doors to experiences, connections, and growth she had never imagined, and she embraced each one fully. Looking back, she marveled at how far she had come. From the quiet, unnoticed waitress who hummed melodies in secret, she had become a musician who touched the lives of countless people. She understood now that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and the willingness to step into the unknown were what truly made a difference. Her story was proof that even ordinary lives could hold extraordinary moments, waiting for the right time to shine. As she played each day, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond recognition or applause. It was the joy of connecting with others, of sharing a part of herself, and of witnessing the impact her music had on people's hearts. The café, once a simple workplace, had become a space of inspiration, creativity, and shared humanity. Through her performances, she had shown that beauty could emerge from the most unexpected places and that courage could transform ordinary lives into something remarkable. In the evenings, after the café had quieted down, she would sit at the piano alone, running her fingers over the keys and reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the moments of doubt, the hours of practice, the secret melodies, and the unexpected encouragement that had changed her path. Each note she played carried the story of her transformation, a reminder that even the simplest beginnings could lead to extraordinary achievements. Her story continued to inspire, not only those who witnessed her music directly, but also people who heard about her journey. The message was clear. Hidden talent, courage, and determination could create extraordinary moments, no matter how ordinary life seemed at first. She had stepped into her true potential, and in doing so, she had shown others that their own hidden gifts could also shine if they were willing to take a chance. And so, she continued to play, to inspire, and to live fully in both her ordinary and extraordinary worlds. The quiet waitress who had once existed in the shadows had become a symbol of courage, creativity, and the transformative power of music. Her journey was a testament to the idea that a single moment, a single choice, could change the course of a life forever. She had found her voice, shared it with the world, and in doing so, had left a lasting mark on everyone who had the chance to listen.